Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi was recently in India on a 4-day whirlwind visit. This is how one of his days went.
Came here, played some cricket in the morning. I'm going to get a tissue because I'm sweating here. I just changed out of my clothes. So I got to play some cricket. We have a match between, there was an employee driver match, right? That we have. That was really cool. So I got to swing a wicket. Is that what is that the right swung the bat? There you go. Then I got a 4. I guess it was. So that was a lot of fun. They didn't embarrass me too much.
And just like an Uber driver deftly shifts lanes, Khosrowshahi seamlessly moved to this.
And then we had a session with a number of electric vehicle manufacturers, battery swap players, etc. Sustainability for us is an area that we're really leaning into. It's an area that we're leaning into globally, but I think the opportunity in India here is super interesting in that it's not just about 4-wheelers, but it's about 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers as well. The government is leaning in. Sustainability is very much of a team sport, and we're identifying kind of the best and the brightest in terms of manufacturers or fleets who can provide these vehicles for our earners, etc., and really leaning into sustainability and building not just a transport network here, but a transport network that's sustainable.
Dara Khosrowshahi took over the ride-hailing app company in 2017 when it was at its lowest, cash-burning, loss-making phase. In 8 years, he turned the global business to profits. India is of course an important market for Uber, but it's loss-making, and of course it has its fair share of challenges. Competitors are sprouting up and growing fast. It's no longer a two-player market. Speaking of two players, its rival-in-chief, Ola, has diversified in a big way into businesses such as electric vehicles. Uber, however, Dara likes to clarify, keeps its focus very sharp on its ride-hailing business, even as it tries to keep winning in a hyper-price-sensitive market and one in which regulations keep changing across different states. So how long before Khosrowshahi turns around Uber India too? Listen to answers from the man himself in this exclusive chat. Khosrowshahi with ET's best minds, Executive Editor Sruthijith KK, Assistant Executive Editor Vinay Pandey, Emerging Business Editor Samidha Sharma, Tech Editor Surabhi Aggarwal, and ET's active startups tracker Pranav Mukul. It's the 6th of March. I'm Anirban Chaudhary. This is the Morning Brief. First, here's a brief overview of where Uber stands now. Let me tell you, it's very different from where it stood just 2 years ago. Here's my colleague who tracks the company actively, Manu Toms.
Nearly 2 years ago, there was a rumor of a possible sale of Uber's India business. Of course, Uber had strongly denied those rumors at that point in time. Uber had, after Dara had come in, that in several markets, Uber sold its business to the incumbent market leaders. And in India, they sold the food delivery business. So, and also there wasn't so much of an action in the cab hailing space for quite some time. And some degree of, say, resizing. So that actually led to some conversation about maybe Uber might sell its India business too. But if you look at its recent actions, we see that it rather want to expand its India presence. So here we see Uber has realized that in India you need to focus on the low-cost offerings. In its gross booking mix, if you look at its gross booking value, in the GBV mix, we see that 40% of it now comes from 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers. It was heavily skewed towards 4-wheelers earlier. So now that is changing quite a bit. And in the cab, we see that they are going big with the electrification of the fleet. So all that show that there's a greater degree of focus.
But there are challenges, of course, primarily size.
India is actually a minuscule market. There is no doubt about that. It is just, it's less than, or it's about 1% of Uber's total revenue. But I think where they see scope is, I think there are two things. One, of course, there is long-term potential. They can be, because they have more ground to cover. The other is more than just the domestic market. I think India is a testing ground for Uber. The products that they develop over here, say three-wheeler or bike taxi or quadricycle, or even the bus segment that they started last year. So I think they are developing this for the rest of the Asian market as well as the African and Latin American markets. So, but I think as far as the challenges are concerned, challenges is still in its direct competition with Ola. While the recent numbers, the fresh downloads show that Uber is gaining ground. Traditionally, Ola remains larger. So that is one challenge. The other is the number of cities. Uber in the past 2 years has been steadily expanding its reach, and it has now reached 125 cities. But Ola is in at least 210 cities. So Uber has a lot of catching up to do. So that's one aspect of the challenges that Uber has.
For the other aspects, in terms of challenges and opportunities, let's go over to the conversation with the man behind the wheel. Dara Khosrowshahi answering a question from Samidha on what it takes to crack the Indian market.
I think for us, the Indian customer is a demanding customer, both in terms of service and price, right? And you've got to be competitive here in all parts of the service that you offer. And I was kidding about it, which is the Indian consumers, is price sensitive. And that's great. And for us, actually, the way I view that is very much positively, which is if we can compete here in India, then that sets us up to compete in many other markets in the world. It has historically been difficult, actually, for many American companies who operate in a higher revenue and higher cost kind of operations to then compete in low-cost markets and lower unit revenue markets. So for us, India represents, not only a market with enormous potential, but a state of mind. How do you make it work here? We now have over 900,000 earners within our platform. We were very strong historically on four-wheelers, but our strength in three-wheelers and two-wheelers is improving. And at the same time, the Indian market's getting more competitive. It was a two-player market.
Yes.
Previously, it's now there are 3-4 players out there. There are many young upstarts that we have to make sure we're on our toes and competing effectively against. I would tell you that we could be profitable in India tomorrow if that was a direction I gave to the teams. The Indian market can structurally be profitable. But based on what I see in terms of the potential of the Indian market, it would be the wrong move to make for us. The right move for us is to continue to lean into India, both in terms of technology talent, but also in terms of how we're building the market and the signal that we're seeing in terms of market leadership. And I dare say our expanding market leadership is terrific signal. And right now, my direction to the team is to keep leaning in. Short-term profits aren't the answer. I'm quite confident that long-term, the Indian market can be profitable. And that's what we're going after.
What has been your journey of looking at India market from the time that you took over Uber in 2017 and now?
I would view that we continue to be incredibly ambitious in terms of the possibilities of the market in India. But if there's one change for me, it's the importance of focus. When we came out of COVID, for example, we got out of certain businesses, autonomous, two-wheelers in terms of bikes and scooters, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. Those are markets that could actually work out for other companies, but they were defocusing our efforts from the core. And what we determined with Uber in India is that in order to win in mobility, we actually have to let go of delivery because I didn't see us having a right to win. It was a highly competitive marketplace. We decided to take an equity stake in Zomato, who has been the winner here, and that turned out to be the right decision. And that actually allowed us to lean in to our business here, our mobility business here. So listen, I'm a different kind of a leader. I'm not going to necessarily, do a bunch of arm waving, et cetera. That certainly has its place and can be quite effective. But our position in India as a company has never been stronger. It's not even close.
Can you share your market share numbers?
I can share that our market share is higher than it has been since I joined, and it has been higher than probably ever. So it has never been better here. So if some of our competitors are distracted by lovely, shiny new efforts and, IPOs, that's great, because I am undistracted and completely focused on the mobility business here. And I think that there's an enormous amount of upside for us. And again, our position in India has never been better.
Dara, you said did I hear you right? You have 900,000 earners on your platform?
Correct. Yes.
Is that
highest ever, I think, at this point, right? Yeah.
And how does that rank against other markets in the world?
I think that there's one other market, Brazil, which is higher. Brazil has broken 1 million. I'm quite confident that we're going to break 1 million earners here in India. And, the earnings for these earners are quite strong, well above, minimum wages, et cetera. Mm-hmm. It's a flexible way to earn.
Are you able to say what might be the median wage or so?
I don't think we've disclosed that at this point. And I think for us, one really exciting initiative is that usually around the world, and it's a factor here in India, is that many of our earners who want to earn on the platform don't have a vehicle available to them. So we want to be there to help them. So for example, some of the efforts that we are quite focused on is striking new deals with, for example, a Tata to go out and secure 25,000 new electric vehicles, or with some of our fleet operators to actually not only provide vehicles for these earners to earn on, but provide electric vehicles for them to earn on sustainably.
And are you able to provide any kind of breakup in terms of how many of these might be 4-wheelers, 2-wheelers, and so on?
I don't know if we have. Have we disclosed that? It's many. 2 and 3-wheelers are growing faster than 4-wheelers.
Faster, but large majority of these earners are still the 4-wheeler drivers, but 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers are the faster growing segment.
So more than 50% of this would be 4-wheelers. But in terms of absolute earnings, where does, is India in the top 5, top 10?
Not in earnings, but in transactions, it's in the top 10.
You mean number of bookings?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And is your supply side now fully back to pre-COVID in terms of the driver supply?
In India, I think so, yeah.
Yeah?
I think we're above
Okay.
pre-COVID.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The reliability of the service is much better. It's in a much better state now.
What about policy?
I think in terms of policy, what we're looking for is a stable policy framework. One of the complications in India is that regulations often change locally from one locality to the other. That's just a part of how India operates. It's a big country. Sometimes there are different local needs. So we understand that. We are a heavily locally regulated company. I think one of the areas of particular focus for us is charging infrastructure. We have, for example, a joint venture with BPGO, but the charging infrastructure requires really a public-private partnership. And at this point, for sustainable movement to really scale in India, all of the players, public and private, local and national, have to be leaning in terms of investment and working together.
A related question on policy and regulation. A lot of companies in the consumer internet space, they welcome some kind of regulation, to the extent that it provides some predictability as to
Yes.
what the governments are expecting. Now in India, more and more state governments over time are trying to get into regulating things like fares, rider safety issues, and so on. Do you sort of look at this as something that creates predictability for business, or does it complicate things?
I think it's a complexity that we're accustomed to. Remember, we operate in over 70 different countries, and in every single one of these countries, we have regulation that is often state by state regulation, city by city regulation, even sometimes airports. that are different.
Yeah.
So we do understand this is a local business. This is, every Uber has incredible impact around the world, but that impact is city by city, town by town, airport by airport. So while we would prefer to have more consistent regulation that allows market forces, for example, supply caps, we don't think make a lot of sense, that allow market forces to determine what the right level of supply is, what the right level of, let's say, fares are, et cetera. It's not about just what we want, but it's about the dialogue that we have with local regulators. And the good news for us is, while sometimes these things move slow, they get to the right place because common sense takes over.
How rapidly is the adoption of electric around the world, and how does India compare with the rest of the world?
The adoption is happening, but frankly, it's not happening as fast as we want it to. I do think that one area that we want to make sure we communicate clearly on is that every vehicle may be built equally, so to speak. But when you talk about sustainability, it's not important how many sustainable vehicles, green vehicles you drive. But what's important is how many miles or kilometers are driven. And the average Uber driver overall around the world is driving 6 to 7 times the number of miles or kilometers than the average driver. So we do think that when we look at the policies of many governments around the world, the policies tend to be focused on how many cars, or some kind of a bonus, on a car basis. But what's important are the miles driven. If there is a next driver that you want to switch from an internal combustion engine to a green vehicle, that's an Uber driver because their impact on the environment is enormous.
What percentage of Uber vehicles globally would be green at this point?
I don't know the percentage, but for example, if you look at the percentage of miles, it's approaching 10% in Europe. In California, it's probably close to 10% in California as well. In London, it's approaching 20%.
So global would be low single digits at this point.
Single digits. I don't know if it's low, but definitely single digits.
And do you have a target to get to some place?
By 2040, we want to be all electric on a global basis.
In India, you have a partnership with Tata's.
Yes.
Is there a bigger sort of partnership on the anvil to do something on the digital front with them, with the group?
Well, right now, the focus of the partnership in Tata is to get sustainable vehicles, to get electric vehicles onto the fleet. Tata is an unbelievably important player here in India. So we're always having dialogue with them about how we can extend and expand our partnership with them.
Okay. Dara, obviously it's been when you stepped into Uber, that was one crisis. And then the pandemic happened, which was the second big crisis for you. And you've spoken about it at length.
I'm used to crises.
And you're the adult in the room, apparently.
There are plenty of adults in the room. I don't agree with that characterization, but I guess it's dramatic.
You're really hailed right now as this one CEO who sort of came in when Uber was literally on fire and sort of got things together. And then the pandemic hit you. But you still are right now in this comfortable space of being profitable and looking at how Silicon Valley and the entire tech world is sort of chasing that golden metric of profitability. Tell us a bit about the journey and also how different both the crisis was when you came to Uber and very reluctantly so. I mean, I was listening to you on Jason Kalanick's podcast with Bill Gurley and him and Altimeter.
Yes, Brad Gerson.
Brad, yes. And you spoke about how you initially had actually said no to taking up the job, and you finally did take it up. How different were both of these situations?
I do think that originally, obviously, Uber was in the news, and I was the average news consumer reading about.
You're talking about your Expedia days.
Yeah, my Expedia days, reading about all the issues that Uber was going through, and I was hesitant at first to join, but for me, it was the magic of the product. I remember the simple piece of advice from my dad, which is when a company who's a verb asks you to run it, just say yes. And so I just thought it was an extraordinary opportunity. I don't think I knew really what I was getting into, but once I'm in something, I push as hard as I can. And I do think that once I got into Uber, I saw a couple of things, which is the external perception of the company and the internal kind of culture of the people there, the employees there, were radically different. There was some incredible talent at the company. They were not bad people in any way, shape, or form, but they needed leadership to set a standard in terms of what we valued and what we didn't value. I remember we had early discussion on safety. Safety is a priority for our company. We talk about standing for safety. And I really pushed the company, and the company also totally understood, to make absolutely certain that we had very high standards in terms of safety for the drivers that we were adding to the platform. And so for us as a company, what I was able to do, and maybe it was because I came in from the outside and I didn't have to fight for my life the way, let's say, Travis or some of the founders did, was to be able to set the standards of some things that we were willing to make sacrifices for. We had to make some pretty significant changes in the governance of the company. Right. No high vote shares, every shareholder, one vote, one share, et cetera. And then for us, while we made some headway, the COVID hit, which was a different kind of emergency for us. And not only was the company losing money, but the most profitable part of our business, mobility, lost 85% of its volume. And we had to stop doing things that were not important or areas where we didn't think we were going to win, along the themes of our selling our delivery business in India or getting out of self-driving, et cetera. That discipline it allowed our company to understand the benefit of focus.
So what do you think of this founder versus CEO debate, which is typically, in the tech world, always sort of spoken about, and you've kind of come in and...
I think it's...
And do you talk to Travis, by the way?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think it's made up drama to feed the press.
Really?
I think it's a name that you give people. Like there are founders who work really well. There are good founders and not so good founders, and there are good CEOs and not so good CEOs. Travis was the right person for the company in its founding. I could have never accomplished what he accomplished. I have a high degree of respect for what he did, but I also understand what he did wrong. And I think he understands what he did wrong. But I know that I couldn't have accomplished what he did. And I'm very lucky that I was able to take over the company in a time of incredible difficulty, but actually the core of the company, the bones of the company that he built were incredibly strong. So I'm very lucky that I got to take over a company that the core service, the customer proposition, the earner proposition was excellent. If you think about it, we were a pretty good tag team, I guess is one thing you would call it.
Where do you stand on the debate between hybrid and pure electric vehicles in terms of...
That's a great question. And I think that both of them are better than internal combustion engines. So I don't know why people are debating, hybrid or electric, when right now what's winning is gasoline powered. So again, I think it's one of these dramas, and the debate is misinformed. Because I do think that hybrid works for certain circumstances in certain markets. And I think the end state, there's no question in my mind that the end state are EVs. But the scariest part of our climate transition is the next 10 years. This is the time when we really have to step forward. But we have to step forward in a way that makes sense economically, that doesn't sacrifice prices, that's affordable for people, that is fair both for developed countries and developing countries. It's not enough for the developed countries to say, who can afford, let's say, moving fully over to electric, to then look down on their noses and at hybrids. So I think, another hybrid on the road is great news. Another electric vehicle on the road is great news. And I think putting hybrid against electric is totally misinformed.
What are the, in your time at Uber, how have the ways in which people use Uber changed? What are the trends in which people use it?
A couple of trends. One is that We're seeing now Uber expand into more and more cities. So Uber is available, and we used to be a big city kind of a business, but now Uber is available in many more cities. Obviously, Uber now, the delivery business is essentially the same size as a mobility business, which is terrific. And we have expanded the number of services that are available. We have the most significant expansion for us is in affordable transportation. And Uber now, the growth of Uber in secondary, tertiary cities, and also in the outskirts of cities. And then the use cases of Uber are changing as well. So not only is it delivery of, mobility of people, delivery of things, but it's also like peer-to-peer delivery. So Uber is just becoming a bigger and bigger part of everyday life in more and more ways. I think that, and for us, it's deeply satisfying in that, again, we can bring that magic of on-demand transportation to more people for more use cases.
Dara, speaking of technology, we have huge two centers in India, and some of the innovations that I think Uber has adopted globally have been developed in India. I think Cash was one of them.
Yes.
Is there something recently that has caught your attention, something that excites you?
One of the areas that I'm particularly excited about are the efforts that we have with taxis. In the olden days when you were talking about Travis, I think taxi viewed Uber as an enemy. But we view, we can bring demand to taxi drivers all over the world. So in markets like Korea or Japan, taxis are the majority of our business. And in markets all over the world, in Italy, in Spain, coming up in London, in New York, in San Francisco, we are now connecting more and more taxis. There are millions of taxis all over the world, and we want to wire up every single one of them.
And this has been developed in India.
This is, I think, 100% developed in India at this point. I mean, it is, the taxi team is in India. Another one that I'm pretty excited about is Uber Bus, high capacity vehicles. These are vehicles that will take, 8, 15, 20 different passengers. It's about lowering the cost of transportation. And again, we can have dynamic routing and pricing, et cetera. We can bring a lot of the Uber magic to the traditional bus. There is a significant amount of innovation that has to go there to figure out what the right routes are to drive the adoption of getting as many seats filled as you can. These are reserved seats so that you're guaranteed a seat on the bus, et cetera. That's another technology that was born here and continues to be developed here.
Would you not dabble with delivery at all here on your own platform?
Do you
regret selling Eats? I mean, Eats is such a big business now for you in the US.
Of course, there are regrets of selling Eats. It was still the right thing to do.
Okay.
Listen, when we look at India, I talk to my teams. Uber is a passionate place, and we're passionate about winning. And in delivery, we didn't win. And I have to accept that I have to take responsibility for that. It was still the right decision to make. We watch our competitors carefully. Ola is dabbling in food delivery, and we're not afraid to watch and learn as a company. Just because we're one of the top tech companies and we got to profitability early doesn't mean we don't have our faults and doesn't mean we have a lot to learn. But I do think right now, I want to focus in India on mobility where we are winning. And I think we can continue to win and eventually win profitably as well. We're not looking to push profits out of India because really we're reinvesting profits back into India. And I expect that to be the case for the next 5 to 6 years. The potential here is so enormous that I want to keep leaning into that potential.
That's it for today. You were listening to this exclusive conversation only on The Morning Brief. This episode was produced by Surohini Jain, Vinayak Aggarwal, sound design by Amdit Redji. An episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, but we are trying to tell you more stories, so expect midweek episode drops such as this one. Do listen to us on a listening platform of your choice and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you and have a good week ahead.